Today, the world runs on code. Every text you send, every website you visit, every screen you swipe, it's all driven by code. Code that only a fraction of the world can even understand. And that's a problem. Imagine if only 1 out of every 400 people knew how to write. Think how many world-changing ideas would have never seen the light of day. We'd be stuck in the dark ages. And when it comes to software development, we kind of are. So what if, instead of writing hundreds of lines of code to add new features to your website, you could just design them directly on your website? What if you could create the next world-changing product without writing a single line of code? That's the future for creators, and it's about to change everything. It's time to unleash the power of software development to everyone by making it visual, so anyone can harness the power of code to build a website, an app, or an entire business without actually writing it. At Webflow, we're doing exactly that. We're empowering creators to design, build, and launch amazing things. No code required. Welcome to the future of software development. Welcome to the age of no code.
Please welcome Vlad Magdalin, co-founder and CEO at Webflow.
Hey everyone, thank you so much. Welcome to the very first Code Conf. I think I can just play that video like 10 times over and take a nap here, and I don't have to do a keynote. But if you're curious, you can also go into that kaleidoscope if you haven't seen it yet, and you can see that video in 6 different perspectives. You can take some amazing selfies there. Hashtag nocodeconf on Twitter or whatever your social media preference is, but you can enjoy that video over and over and over. And I know that something like this, a video like that, a space like this, so many people here from so many different countries, it doesn't happen by accident. And I just want to give a huge, huge thanks to the sponsors that helped us put this together. Like an event like this costs around $4 billion, believe it or not. So these folks picked up at least half of that. So no take-backsies. And especially a huge thank you to the FlowPros team who partnered with the Shift.org organization to get 10 scholarships for veterans to be here. And also the MemberStack team, who I hope you have a chance to meet as well. They're also here. They set up 10 community college students to be able to sit in the audience today. So huge thank you. Why don't we give them a round of applause? Also, a lot of times, this will go towards the end where the credits will roll, but literally nothing here would happen without the amazing crew, the people who are at the doors, who are serving food, who are preparing chairs, who are creating all these amazing installations, preparing coffee. And those people, I know it can seem like they're invisible or in the background, but literally none of us would be here without them. So please give them a warm round of applause. And I don't have a slide for this, but just a personal huge thank you to someone named Brittany who put this entire event on. She works on Webflow's event team. She's our head of community. And without Brittany, none of this would happen. She joined the Webflow team just several months ago during the summer on the day that I took off for vacation. It just happened to align that way. So she came in with no boss and no plans really, just an idea of let's get a lot of people in a room to talk about no code. And then I came back 2 weeks later to a date, a venue, an entire plan, a bunch of vendors, and here we are in this room today. So huge round of applause for Brittany. And just a bit of housekeeping. So yesterday we got a lot of feedback that once something is happening on a stage, If there are a lot of conversations happening on the side, it's a little harder to hear. So just to respect the speakers who are here, whatever's happening on the main stage, please try to, if you're on the periphery, try to really keep those conversations quiet. So I just wanted to send that reminder. But mostly, today I want to talk to you all about why the no-code movement matters. A lot of people say it's not even a movement, but we hope to prove otherwise. My goal today, honestly, is to convince you why this movement is so pivotal in this moment in history we are today, where we are today with software in general, with the internet, with the world at large. And I want to talk about what it means, what happens when we unleash human potential. And I went to a stock photography site and I typed in human potential, and this is what came up. And then I went to a pretty big rabbit hole that led me to, I don't know what this guy's doing. He's looking at a light bulb on a road. This is obviously human potential. This team looks excited. I think they just accomplished something. That's pretty incredible. And I don't know what this is a lady throwing spaghetti in a forest. I'm sure if you reach that zenith of your life, that's saying something. I think this was my favorite. It's just really getting to the point. But really, the idea I want to get across is look around this room, just to your left, to your right. Literally everyone in this, you can look up if you have one of those yes, I'm awkward stickers on your badge. But every one of us in this room has a story to tell. Every one of us wants to create something, invent something, inspire somebody else. We're all makers. We all want to change something. We want to change the way that the world works, or we want to create some new process or a new service or a new product. And especially in this room, the people who are gathered here are really the people who aren't okay with the status quo. There's something that you want to, some change that you want to make. And really, as naive or as cliche as that sounds, we really do want to change the world. And the way that we want to make change usually requires a medium. To create something, you need the tools and the technologies and the source materials to create with. And I want to go back a little bit through history and just show you what happens when technologies and the mediums that we can create with are unleashed and more people are empowered to use them to their benefit. So let's start with something like the printing press. The printing press started initially as something that was very exclusive to only churches and governments and organizations that could really afford this really expensive equipment. And then we democratized that skill even more. We made it available so other people could write letters and start to publish books. And now we have essentially the world at our fingertips, and we can post a tweet and have it go live into the world. And what did that do? Even if we look at the number of books that were created through the course of time, the more access people have to a medium, the easier we make that access. Creativity and output and innovation go through the roof. Look at something like recording music. It used to be that you needed to have the right connections, you needed to find an agent, you needed to really know the right people that had access to a recording studio, that signed a contract, and now you can pull together a little studio in your home, you can publish on Spotify or SoundCloud, and we see the results of that. The number of new recordings is spiking through the roof because we've made access to that medium more accessible to a lot more people. It's not that creativity wasn't there, it's just that it hasn't been unleashed yet. Look at something like making movies. You used to have to, same story, you have to have access to an entire movie studio. This is $1 million+ operation, and really we had this kind of closed system for the gates you had to go through in order to translate an idea that you want to tell through a story or in a movie theater. You have to go through these very specific sets of people to be able to have access to that medium. And now we have more and more indie studios And we have people like literally creating content in their living rooms that are benefiting other people. And even if you look at just feature-length movies, like that's spiking through the roof too. And that's not even to mention what's going on YouTube, where every minute there's 300 hours of original content uploaded. So the story's pretty simple. Like when we remove barriers for people to create, we get a lot more ideas. We create a pathway for many more people to take something that's sort of germinating in their minds, and we help them bring that to reality. And when people have access to these mediums, to these new tools, you start, like, new things start sparking. And it's not always the case that you have an idea that's just waiting to be created. A lot of times you're waiting for something to be tangible, tactile, something that you have access to, for those ideas to even come across, for your brain to spark them. So think of something like Legos. When my kids start playing with Legos, it's not like they have a specific vision for something that they want to create, but just having access to those Legos can give them, like, inspiration and creativity. And actually, one of my favorite moments was the first time I brought my 2 daughters into the Webflow office, where we had a temporary 3D printer, and we have, like, this laser cutter. And immediately, like, their minds were, like, lit up, or like, oh, we can create this, we can create this Webflow logo, or these little toys. And immediately, you have, like, this spark of joy and spark of creativity that happens when people have access to that creative power. So what does this have to do with no code? I'm sure many of you can guess, but I'll elaborate. So it's 2019. The World Wide Web, believe it or not, even though the internet is like 6 decades or so old, the World Wide Web, when we first started using browsers to access information, is only 29 years old. It may feel like we've had access to it for a long time, but it's relatively young. There's actually 49 days left in this decade, believe it or not. So if you have any, like, new decade resolutions that you haven't met yet, get to them. But it might feel like everything that we've experienced on the web is sort of already the pinnacle. Like, we started with these amazing websites. I mean, like, how do you top that? And now we have all these internet-connected software and services and products that touch our lives in so many different ways. I mean, probably the majority of this room, if not all of you, somehow interacted with either Airbnb or Lyft or Uber or, Google, just to get here, to stay here, to be here. We've all benefited from what internet-connected software, products, and services have brought to our lives. So we can see the power of these products, of what software and what the internet can do for us. But here's the rub. Get it? It's a little dry humor. Here's the rub. Everything, nearly everything that we use today has been created in code. It's been created by people who know how to code. And that's a tiny, tiny percentage of the world's population. There's 25 million people on Earth who know how to code, which sounds like a pretty big number, right? But that's only 0.3% of the world's population. Not 3%, 0.3%. I'm going to give you a moment to let that sink in. Get it? I mean, this is all dad jokes, right? We literally have stickers that say made with dad jokes. Like, this is the amount of people who are creating for the internet is, if you take this entire room, there's maybe one person, if it's representative of the world's population, that's actually creating the types of things that are impacting our everyday lives. And that's a wild imbalance between who's consuming on the internet and who's creating on the internet. And that's exactly where we are with software creation day. It's kind of like, the video made this analogy, but if all the people in this room knew how to read, but if only one or two people in this room knew how to write, like, imagine all of the ideas, all of the creativity that wouldn't be happening if there was that wild imbalance between those two disciplines. And the other thing is, most of the software that's created today, it's created by 80% men and 70% white men. So this is like the services, the experiences, the things that impact everyone's lives may not be being built by infusing the experiences of the entire world's population, of all of our experiences. And in those people who aren't creating, like the millions of people who aren't creating for the internet, who aren't writing code, who don't have this ability to go into a text editor, get access to servers, and create this amazing software. Like among those people are probably people who have ideas for products and services and things that they want to change that could impact all of our lives for the better. There are people who could invent new markets or transform existing ones, like things that we're probably not even thinking about. But those ideas probably won't see the light of day if those people don't get access to this powerful new medium that humanity has created. So, where do we go from here? A lot of people say, let's just teach everyone to code. And that's a really, really laudable and important skill to keep developing. We're going to need more coders than ever. We already have a massive deficit of how many coders are needed to how many exist. But the actual skill of learning how to develop software is becoming harder and harder and harder. When I first started, it was just these three technologies. It was HTML, CSS, and maybe a little JavaScript. That's all I needed to know. I could literally pick up a book and learn these three things and become a web developer. I could become a professional. Then that expanded to a lot more, then a lot more, then a lot more. And this slide is a day old, so this is probably like totally changed now. And for a lot of people, like seeing the escalating complexity of what you have to learn in order to become a specialist in web development or software development, it's a completely overwhelming proposition. Even for people who have been in the industry for a long time, people who have been coding, even for them, it's an overwhelming proposition. And it's simply not scalable. Like we see how quickly people are learning how to code. It's just not happening fast enough. The fact that complexity is going through the roof and that people are learning so slowly, we can see already that it's not scalable. And we've solved problems like this before. If we think back to the days of Morse code, of when we used to pass messages to each other using the telegraph, we would literally go to a telegraph operator. That person would write that in plain English, and then in their head translate it to Morse code as they send the message across. And that message goes to another telegraph operator. That operator translates it back to English from Morse code and passes that message on to the recipient, which was great. And there were a lot of companies that were actually trying to say, like, hey, this is amazing technology. Why don't we take the telegraph machine and put it into every home? That way, people can just learn Morse code. And they had like little cheat sheets like this where you could learn how each letter translates to dots and dashes. And that was the kind of direction for some folks. But we all know in this room that that's not how we solve the problem of being able to communicate to one another, to be able to pass a message across the world. We solved that through a telephone. We found technology that actually speaks to, that connects to skills that people already have and solves that problem in a much more natural and a much more, in a way that has much fewer barriers. And we did the same thing with mainframes. Like it used to be that anytime you wanted to do any sort of like computation or make like a complicated financial model or something like that, you would have to use a mainframe. You would have to have access to all of these like this technical infrastructure. But we didn't solve that by teaching everybody how to use a mainframe. We solved that by inventing spreadsheets. And now, over 1 billion people use spreadsheets to get access to that kind of computing power. So what we really need is, aside from teaching a lot more people how to code, that's still really, really important, but what we really need is to invent just a radically more inclusive and more human way of creating software, something that a lot more people connect with. And what do I mean by creating software? A lot of people kind of don't have clear definitions around what software even is. At the end of the day, software is they could be websites, there could be applications, but they're ways that we ask the computer, this thing that we invented, this microprocessor, to do work for us. And when software first started, it literally was just the microprocessor, which understands zeros and ones, electrical signals that are either on or off. And programmers used to think that way. They used to think in, I'm going to send 0101, which means add, and then like a number represented in zeros and ones as the first operator, and then the next one, et cetera. And then at some point, people figured out, hey, that's probably too hard. We're spending a lot of time translating from zeros and ones to what we actually mean. And we had like all this technology to actually like punch these zeros and ones into punch cards, and literally like would stack up these software applications in these punch cards. This is actually about 5 megabytes of a program, and that's how we used to like tell computers how to do work for us. Then eventually we got tired of that, and we said, all right, maybe we can write something that's a little more human-like, a little more English, or a little more expressive. And that's when we invented assembly language that could more or less describe in more understandable terms what we mean. And then we went even higher level and started writing computer programming languages that are more and more like English, that then hide away all of this complexity, that at the end of the day still translate to assembly, still translate to zeros and ones, still translate to the processor, but it's doing so much work for us. And then, as programmers, as developers, we started doing the same thing to hardware as well. Like, so many companies, so many different businesses would have to run their own servers, change their own hard drives, and then Amazon Web Services came around and completely abstracted away that entire problem. And now we just press a button and say, new server. There's still people that need to replace hard drives, order new machines, make sure that there's air conditioning, et cetera. We're just hiding that complexity behind a wall where experts deal with it, but we still have access to that same computing power. We did the same thing for things like taking a payment. It used to be that you had to like interface with all these banks and payment providers. And then Stripe came along and said, forget about it. Like, we'll handle all of the complicated details. You just send us an API call, and we'll take care of the rest. We made that problem a lot simpler. You can almost think of it like a lot of people refer to it as standing on the shoulders of giants. When you use these services, there's so much going on behind the scenes that is being done for you. You just don't have to know about it anymore. All you care about is the ultimate problem, making a payment, getting a server, or something like that. And no code is simply that to the next degree. What we're doing is we're taking these things that already have a bunch of functionality behind them, adding a lot of the technologies that developers use today by interfacing with them with code, and we're putting a visual UI on top of that. So that's what Webflow is. It's just another, well, I don't want to say it's just another, but it's a way to access all of this power with all of that complexity in a way that is accessible to 100 times as many people. And you might ask, especially if you're a developer, like, does this mean if we're saying no code, does that mean no more coders? And just like I said before, there's going to be a need for way more coders than in the past. And to illustrate a little bit of why I don't think it's a problem at all for some coders to be able to step away from some of these like small translation tasks, I want to tell a little bit about how I got into development. So I actually started here down the street in art school at the Academy of Art. And I wanted to work at Pixar, so I was doing work like this. I was doing 3D modeling. And I was so used to tools like this, it was just it's very natural that you go to art school, you want to make 3D movies, and the software that you use to make 3D movies just looks tactile, looks like you can directly manipulate the thing that you're creating. And then I had to drop out of art school, couldn't afford it anymore, and I went back to study computer science, because my dad was like, that's the only way you're going to get a job, so go do computer science. So I went back to computer science school, and I got an internship at this agency where my job was now creating stuff like this. Pretty basic websites, but the practice went from like really creating something that I pressed a button and it went live, to now having arguments with designers. So there's like this designer, he would say, oh, I want this part not orange, but blue, and then we would go back and forth and have this, like my entire job was essentially figuring out in the morning what changes they wanted to make, going into the code base and making that change over and over and over. And that's when it struck me, like, why am I doing this translation work? Why am I really taking the intentions that a designer already knows? They know exactly what they want to do if they have the right tools to be able to say, hey, this is the intent I want. This is the change that I want. If they had the ability to directly make that change, like, why do I even need to be in the picture? I could actually go on and do way more interesting work. And that's actually what inspired me to start working on Webflow. Like, that day, when I had like this pretty big argument with a designer, I was like, ugh, like, this shadow should not be this way. That's when I was inspired to go back to the drawing board and create something that ended up turning into Webflow, where I could just like give that designer a tool and say like, hey, that intention that you have, why don't you just like make that change and it'll just happen. And that's what led to Webflow. And that was even though that was the original inspiration for Webflow, there's now so many different companies. So many of you are in this room that are like running these companies or using no-code tools. It's starting this movement. Like, the no-code movement is inspiring so many people to look beyond kind of the limitations of having to go learn how to code, how to figure out all these front-end and back-end frameworks, and just to really focus on the problem that you're trying to solve and just get it out there, like solve the actual problem. And these companies, and all the people in this room, especially in this room, who are coming together and who are watching on the live stream, we're coming together. Like, I can feel that we're coming together not because it's just another tool or another set of tools that solves a small problem for us. I think it really speaks to the energy around this movement, that people are coming together to, like, we don't accept the status quo. Like, we know how tedious the previous generation of building software is. We know how much of a barrier that feels like to us. And we're here, I hope, because we can see that by breaking through this barrier, by shattering the status quo, by removing this cost of translation, we can actually have so much more done in the world. And just to show you a small glimpse of what that could mean, I want to introduce you to Matt, Ali, and Brett. So Matt and Ali and Brett, they visited Haiti after after the disaster they had over there, and they just had this realization that they wanted to do something to help people who were left homeless. There were thousands of people left homeless, and all these organizations that were coming through, like the Red Cross, et cetera, they weren't doing anything to restore the ability for people to be back in their homes, to call something their own, to be able to be with their family. And they started this organization called New Story Charity. But before they even started, they had this idea of like, what would happen if we tried to raise enough money to build a tiny little home for 3 families? And they were able to build this entire app that at the end of the day didn't have a bunch of backend logic behind it. They just made it look like a legit app. And Matt was logging in at the end of the day, seeing like the form submissions that were coming through, would literally go in and change that number, like the 4,800 number, to a higher number. But to everybody else, it looked like an app. And it was good enough, at the time, this was like 4 years ago, was good enough to get those families actually funded. And that gave them inspiration to quit their jobs, to focus on this full time, to go raise more money. And since then, that team has been able to build thousands of homes across many different countries. They've raised millions of dollars, and they're making massive, massive change in the world that might not have happened if they weren't able to validate this idea without that code barrier. And now it's not just small companies and nonprofits and small little entrepreneurs that are making change with these no-code tools. We have tons and thousands of companies, millions of customers across all the companies I mentioned before that are creating no-code layouts and workflows, databases, entire applications. Like, teams are skipping the entire translation layer. They're skipping the need to go from a design team to an engineering team. Marketing teams are moving so much faster. They're taking on more and more complex and interesting problems. And this also means for developers don't have to be that translation layer anymore for things that can be done in no code. Developers can jump into like writing really powerful algorithms, to working on things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, that are really taking their skills and applying them in a much more interesting and precise way. And that's just like, the number of companies is expanding every day. And now they're building, like people who are using these tools, spinning up ideas faster than ever. And it's happening every day. If you look at just the Webflow, the showcase, and there's tons of these kinds of showcases across like Bubble and other tools that are Zapier that are in the no-code space. And even though it started with mostly like website use cases, now it's jumping into entire applications and jumping into things that we couldn't even imagine a few years ago. And one thing that I'm personally super excited about, and some of this is already starting to happen, but for Webflow specifically, even though we started with websites, we're now making a huge leap into not just websites, but beyond that, into applications. We envision, over the next few years, like people, like a visual developer, being able to, from scratch, being able to build something like a product hunt, something like an Airbnb, something like a Yelp, to whatever problem that you're solving. It doesn't have to be a clone of these things, but we're working on the foundations to give people the building blocks to be able to put together the kinds of products and services and world-changing ideas that we're already like privy to today, that we're using today, that were built by coders. And if you really zoom out, this is what it feels like to me. We're kind of like way in the very beginning phases of what software creation means to the world. In 1995, a lot of people, when they saw the internet, there was so many articles that called the internet a toy, like it's a fad. It's, it's only useful for little things. It's only, people won't really switch to buying their things this way or consuming entertainment this way. But we all know what happened with the internet. We all know it's not a toy. So people who think that what's happening here is just for tiny little use cases or to automate some small process, I think they have another thing coming. Like there is so much untapped potential for what we can create with these no-code tools, with visual software development, that it's just almost unfathomable to me that we'll even be able to predict what kinds of things will be created. So in summary, all the people in this room, all the people watching, we're all pioneers. Like we're at the beginning of this new movement, even though some people might say, like WYSIWYGs and things have existed for many decades, something is different this time. I think we all feel it. We all feel that over the last few years, and especially over the last year, something is happening where there's so much more excitement. There's so much more, so many more things that are being created, so many more examples of real world production, real applications, things that are going up on Product Hunt, changing people's lives, like making revenue, creating new businesses. These things are happening. And all the people sitting in this room, we all have a responsibility. Not only, like I hope you're not just here to, like learn how to solve a specific use case or solve a specific problem. I hope you're here because you feel like this sense of community, that we're all on this ground floor of this new movement that can bring more power to a lot more people. And the way we do that is by removing the code barrier. Like we have to remove the code barrier to really unleash that kind of power into so many more hands, because it's just not realistic. It's just not scalable for the world to be able to catch up and teach everyone to be able to code to create stuff like this. And if we do that, if together we're successful, we can literally empower 100 times as many people to create software. So it's not 0.3%, not 3%, but 30%, if not higher. And I personally have this just deep sense of purpose and knowing that by creating these types of tools, by putting more power into people's hands, we are going to make a huge difference in other people's lives. And not only are we going to make a huge difference in the people who are creating these tools and services, but in the lives that they touch, in the lives that are impacted by the products and services that they create. So if we go 10 years into the future, like just imagine what kinds of things are possible. What kinds of things could we imagine 10 years after people were saying that the internet was a toy? A lot of those things were huge surprises to us. So just think, like, leaving this room, if we succeed together, if we all play our parts in creating these tools, in getting people excited, in showing others by example what's possible, in putting this into practice, I firmly believe that all of us are going to have a huge part in creating a lot more innovation, creating a lot more companies, which will create a lot more economic potential, which will create a lot more jobs, which will create a lot more just growth for the world. Like, that could be a huge, huge driving force. And it feels like this is day one. Even though we're in year 29 of the internet, it just feels like this is the starting off point, where so many more people are empowered to take advantage of one of the greatest inventions that humanity has ever created, the internet. So with that, welcome to the age of no code. One last thing, and I didn't say one more thing because then people would think we're like announcing a phone with 4 cameras or something. One last thing, very important. We talk about a lot about our mission of empowering people, but this event is taking place in one of the most disempowered and underserved communities in the Bay Area. And just to show our commitment, and I hope you all join us in this, to show our commitment to empower people on and off the web, we're partnering today with Larkin Street Youth Services. They're actually hanging out in a lounge over there, so you can please say hi, hang out with them, and talk to their team. But we're making a donation of $75,000, which will support the education of at least 150 homeless youth here in the Bay Area. And we're also matching up to $25,000 more today. So please join us in, please find me or the Larkin Street Youth Services team, and let's make that happen. Let's raise at least $100,000 for this really, really important organization. Thank you all.